My name is Chris Capossela, and I worked at Microsoft from 1991 to 2024. I worked across many, many different professions. Marketing, engineering, operations, sales, wore a lot of different hats. And it was just a, fantastic ride. I joined right out of college. So it was the first job I had after graduating from college. And really, that lasted 32 years. I never planned for it to be that long. That wasn't the intention to work at a single company for, 3 decades. But the place had so much to offer, so many different experiences. I could wear so many different hats that, you look up and it's like, wow, a lot of time has gone by and I'm still really enjoying it. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts. I grew up in a Italian-American neighborhood called the North End in Boston, and surrounded by, lots of aunts and uncles and grandparents. And we lived in an apartment building where we lived on the top floor of the apartment building. My grandparents lived below us, and the family Italian restaurant was on the ground floor of the apartment building. So life was basically revolved around the restaurant that my parents opened when they were like 19 and 20 years old and lasted 46 years. So the only job I had other than Microsoft was working at the family restaurant. We worked really, really hard as a family. I did every job in the restaurant. And if you look at my career at Microsoft, I did a lot of rotation. And I think, feeling like that was very normal was because of the way my parents sort of raised us. Hard work, for sure, was, an expectation from a really young age. And that, you have to achieve anything, you're going to have to put in the hours. I think an understanding that on anything that humans do, the spectrum of how they do it is incredible. The hard work to specialize was something that they were really good at sort of teaching us. My dad read an article in the Boston Globe about this company called Lotus that was like a mile across the river from where we lived. And they made this thing called Lotus 123, which was this spreadsheet. And he read this article, and it sort of, for whatever reason, he thought, hey, this PC thing might be interesting. He went out, he bought an IBM PC, and he went to his youngest son, who was me. I was 12 at the time. And he said, you're going to learn how to use this, and you're going to learn how we're going to use it in the restaurant. And he put me in a D-base programming class at a local computer associates store. And so I'd never turned on a PC before, and I walked into the class, and, 5 or 6 weeks later, I could write simple things in a database. It was a database program, kind of like Access today before, or SQL Server way before, just a PC version. And he made it my job to figure out how to apply it to the restaurant. So that reading that article, it changed my life. And so I wrote a reservation program, a database reservation program. So when people called up to make a reservation, we typed it in the computer as opposed to writing in the book. And then I ended up doing that for a couple of the restaurants in the neighborhood because they had heard about it and they hired me to do it for them. And, then I wrote an inventory software program using this database product. And I just kept finding ways to apply it. And I kind of fell in love with it. We used spreadsheets to keep track of the sales. And so by the time my high school offered an AP computer science class, it was only the second year that they did that when I was a senior. And I took AP computer science as a senior in high school. And it was 5 kids in the class. Nobody took the class. And it was just like, wow, there's this other language out here. And let me learn this language. And that just ballooned into, I really love these things, which led to computer science and economics in college. And then all these college kids were running around talking about their summer internships at this crazy company in Seattle, Washington. I never got a chance to do one of those. I was working at Dom's at the restaurant, but they were just raving about this guy named Bill and about the beautiful mountains of Seattle and this campus out in Redmond, Washington. And so when it was time to apply for jobs, obviously Microsoft was one of the places I wanted to look at, not having any idea whether I'd, want it or not, but they said such good things. So it was a Boston Globe article, my dad picking me to use the PC, and then all these kids running around campus, saying how Seattle was the greatest place they'd ever spent a summer in. And that led to this. A great guy named John Sage came to Harvard campus to interview a bunch of young people like me, and I was one of them. And we spent the 45 minutes talking about Dom's restaurant and all the things we did at Dom's restaurant with technology. He didn't ask me a single question about my computer science experience in college. He just loved the business aspect of Dom's. And he's like, you got to come out and interview. And so we just had a wonderful 45-minute conversation that was back to my roots in the North End of Boston. And that led to my first plane trip across the Mississippi was to come interview at Microsoft. I never really left Boston. The really cool thing was I got to drive a U-Haul around the United States of America for a year and give seminars in sort of tier 3 cities in the US to 350 people in a hotel ballroom, which I set up. You did a 3.5-hour seminar in the morning and a 3.5-hour seminar in the afternoon to 700 people across the two of them. And then you packed up the big screen and the big projector and you put it in the back of your U-Haul and you drove to the next city and you did it all over again the next day. And I did that. That was my first job at Microsoft. And the seminars were on Windows. They were on Excel and Word and PowerPoint and this thing called Microsoft Office, which nobody really knew of at the time. And it was just a crazy fun, road warrior type job. The cool thing about that job was you really learned Windows, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. You really learned the products, and you'd had a lot of face-to-face interaction with customers because you were the only Microsoft person they had ever seen. So they would bring you all their problems. Before the seminar started, they'd be like, hey, my computer's doing this. Can you figure it out? And so other people at the company kind of realized that, hey, these people on this team, there are only 8 of them. They know this stuff really well. And it's a great foray to becoming a product manager or a product marketer. And so we were actually relatively well sought after by the product teams. And so after I did it for a year, there were opportunities to go join these teams that really wanted people who knew the products really well and had a lot of customer experience, even though they were still 22. They're really, really young and early in their career. So I was very lucky that was part of that. And it began that process of trying on lots and lots of different hats at the company. So I was a database product manager at a time when we were launching a product called Microsoft Access and a product called Microsoft Fox Pro, which we had bought from another company called Fox Software. Microsoft had no desktop database in the market, and we decided to have 2. And so I got to join the team that had to figure out how to market 2 databases that ran on the PC. And that was sort of my first maybe mainstream job at Microsoft. I loved being closer to the engineers, because on the seminar team, you had no idea who built this stuff. And so being in marketing, you were, sitting right with the team who was building the software. And I loved having that sense of all these disciplines working together, writers writing the manuals and the user assistants, and program managers writing the specs, and engineers writing the code, and marketers figuring out how to price it and name it and bring it to market. I loved that multidisciplinary aspect of the teams. And that led me to becoming a program manager and wearing a little more of the computer science hat that I'd had in college. And I did that for a bunch of years. And I started kind of working around all of those different sort of jobs, if you will. I got a random email from an executive who had been running the database team for a while. And he had forwarded a mail from Bill Gates. Bill had announced that his speech helper was moving on, and Bill wanted to hire a new speech helper, but not so much a PR person, more of a product person. And he described what he was looking for. And this database team leader forwarded it to me and said, this sounds like you. You should apply for this job. And I did. And went through a crazy process and got a job as Bill Gates's speech assistant in 97. And that was a phenomenal 2.5 years of sort of blowing my mind, of seeing a much, much bigger company than just, here's how we build Access, here's how we build Word, here's how we build an individual product. And that was a transformative job for sure. Boy, Bill was just the most curious person I'd ever seen. That was one thing I learned. Another thing I learned is very, very down to earth, and treating people as we walked through hotels or, went to green rooms. He had no airs about him. He had no special rider. He didn't need purple M&Ms. There's none of that stuff. You know what I mean? He just wanted a cheeseburger for lunch, and he just wanted to do work and build software. And so despite having all of these resources, I was shocked at just how down to earth he was. And I think that was very powerful to see. And then, of course, philanthropy. I got to see up close and personal somebody who came from an environment that I didn't grow up in and who understood the responsibility of giving back and of trying to use the resources that they had to make, the world a much better place, not just his own personal life. So those are some of the things. And then time management, my God, the most valuable resource for him is time. And so he was just so methodical and professional and sophisticated about how he planned his time for his whole year. And his time management processes I got to be part of. And then I applied them to myself, even though I didn't need them to his extent. And that really helped me with work-life balance through the more executive part of my life. So my network really exploded because of that job. And when it was 2.5 years in, I got another random email from somebody who worked in our EMEA headquarters in Paris. He was the chief of staff to the president of Europe, Middle East, and Africa, the sales organization, that region that was responsible for 38 subsidiaries. And his chief of staff time was coming up. I had gotten to know him because I worked with him to plan Bill's trips to his region. And he said, I have to come up with 5 or 6 names for my boss to find my replacement. You're one of the names that I think should be on the list. Are you interested? And it would mean living in Paris. It would mean moving very far away from the center of the company. And you'd be in a sales organization. And Bill was the one who, when I talked to him about the job, said, 2 staff jobs in a row, don't love that, but living outside of Redmond and getting to see the life of the field would make you really, really more valuable. And I think you'd learn a lot. You wouldn't add value right away, but you would eventually. And then you'd be better off when you came back. And so he really encouraged me, if that person would hire me, he said, if they'll have you, you should really go do that job. And I did. And I moved to Paris with my wife and was the business operations person for the president of Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and a kid who hadn't really traveled before flying to Seattle and driving a U-Haul, got to see 38 countries, from Israel to Turkey to South Africa to the UK, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Greece, blah, 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 blah. It was my world exploded again. I use this phrase that I read from an author named Brian Stevenson, that proximity powers empathy. Getting more proximate to your customers makes you better at serving those customers. Getting more proximate to a community that you're not part of, but you want to learn about, makes you more empathetic to what that community is experiencing. It helps us build better products. It, makes us more effective in so many ways. So I think, getting out of Redmond, seeing the world, getting closer to customers is a great lesson for people like me who are product centric. The next thing was going back to Seattle or Redmond, and I got to run the Microsoft project team, which was an 80-person team. And I hadn't managed a soul up until this point. So going from no management to now you're running a 80-person team that project generates probably close to $1 billion in revenue a year. At the time, it was like 300 million, which was a big, big number. It would have been like the top 20 software companies in the world if it was its own entity. That was an awesome hidden gem of a job. People left you totally alone. The CEO did not spend time on Microsoft project, but you got to spend all your time on it. And there are millions of people that have project manager on their business card, and they use Microsoft project. It's the tool of the trade. It was one of my favorite jobs in the 30 plus years. It was just awesome. I left because Jeff Rakes, who is the head of the division, told me one day that it was time for our annual one-on-one as I passed him in the hallway. And I said, great, I'll get on your calendar. He's like, no, we're going to have it now. And I'm like, great. And so went into his office, and he told me that on Monday, I would start as the corporate vice president of office marketing. And I'm just done with Microsoft project. It's like, what? So I got to do that job through 2 big technological revolutions, one being client server and the other being the cloud. And learning, doing business model work was really, really, really important. Like figuring out the pricing and licensing of our products, moving away from the tradition to what the new is something that was one of the most important things I think I got to work on with a lot of great, smart people. And marketing and finance work really, really closely on that. probably the most highly leveraged work I've ever done is figuring out how to move away from PC-based monetization to PC and server-based to cloud-based. Microsoft does a great job telling great stories. There's always room for improvement. We also we have so many products, so many industries that we work in. It's hard to do it great every single day. But we can point to so many examples where we've told very compelling stories. And we can point to times where we really have struggled before we found our footing. And anytime there's a big tech shift, the storytelling is very rough at the beginning and it gets smoother and better, the more we learn. And I think that's true for AI. I think that's true for client server. I think that's true for cloud. It takes us a little while, because we don't know what we don't know. But the good news is we stick with it. We're constantly evolving and getting better. And I love that notion that progress is the goal, not perfection. I never planned on being the chief marketing officer. I didn't join the company and say, 20 years from now, I want that job. It wasn't a ambition that I had. It just sort of developed over time. When Satya became the CEO, he felt like the marketing setup wasn't right. And he talked to a bunch of people and my name came up enough times that he, like Jeff, just sort of said, hey, I want you to do this job now. I want you to stop the job you're doing. It was a sales job. And I want you to come and run marketing. So it wasn't a thing that I did a big long interview loop for. And I got turned down for tons of jobs over my career at Microsoft. But it was one of those, right time, right place, I think, right culture, the culture he wanted to build, more aligned to the way I went to work every day. And I was very lucky for that to happen. I don't think it would have happened if it wasn't, the right person at the right time. I think, for me, showing up as a full-fledged member of the team, of Satya's senior leadership team, making marketing matter, but also working for the success of my peers is something I feel like I did well. What does Amy Hood need from the marketing team for her to be successful? What does Phil Spencer need from the marketing team for him to be successful? I love that notion that my job is to make my boss successful. It's to make my peers successful. And it's to develop the people below me, the people in my team to be the future leaders of the company. That's a mentality I had early on when I took that job. And I feel like for the most part, I got to use that as a North Star to drive the way I behaved and the things I worked on. Having a front row seat to the cultural transformation at the company is probably one of the most blessed things I've had in my life. Being able to see Satya ride the cloud wave, even if we were super late in some areas, and reinvent the company's culture over the last 10 years has been just an incredible blessing to be part of that and to see that all happen. And then about 4 years ago, I would say he really latched on to AI as the next cloud wave. And he started talking about it incessantly with the senior leaders, not with everyone at the company yet, but talking about it incessantly as, hey, we have to reinvent everything around this. We have to reinvent all our jobs. We're going to have to reinvent every product. We're going to have to reinvent the way we work with customers. This is far more transformative than the cloud. And so getting maybe 4 years of that, even if it's really come to fruition in the last 2 years, was awesome too. In realizing, it just keeps happening. The cloud was just one version of it, and now here comes another. And 15 years from now, there'll likely be another. The perseverance that's part of the Microsoft DNA has served the company just so incredibly well. And it's lining up behind big, bold bets that aren't going to pay off right now. But 5 years from now, 7 years from now, they will reap incredible benefits and keep you at the top. I think the fascinating thing about Microsoft is it's bigger and stronger than any particular leader. And leaders can have huge impact in the zone of their experience. But the time will come when they're gone, and the time will come where their legacy is forgotten. Hopefully the systems that they put in place, right? And the way we launch products, the way we market products, the way we do digital campaigns, the way we do comms, I think the future generations get to build on the shoulders of the people who did all that work before them. But they don't have to know who those people were. They just have to say, oh, great, they did this, and now I get to make it far better. And in that sense, no one really has a legacy. I think for me, the most meaningful thing is always when somebody that I've worked with achieves some new height that they didn't think they were going to get to. So the ascendancy of someone on your team to your job or to a huge job that they didn't think they could do, those are super, super meaningful. When you see people achieving their potential and you know you were a small part of it, damn, that's good. And Microsoft lets you do that.